All right, so get ready because today we're going to deep dive into some seriously fascinating stuff.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, all those sources you sent over about vulnerability and shame?
Yeah.
Well, let me tell you, this book, Vulnerability Over Shame by Christopher Macor,
Hmm.
it's already like shifting my whole perspective.
Really?
Yeah, and today we're going to unpack, why vulnerability is so key to like living a fulfilling life
Right.
and maybe even to a better world, who knows?
You know what's really striking about Macor's approach is how he, dives right into the heart of the matter.
Yeah.
He doesn't shy away from the fact that vulnerability can feel terrifying,
Oh, totally.
especially, in a world that often misinterprets it as weakness.
It's true. We're practically like conditioned to hide all our imperfections.
Right.
So how does he help us break free from that?
Well, he starts by drawing this really clear distinction between vulnerability and shame.
Oh.
He says shame kind of whispers, "You're not enough,"
Oh, wow.
and it urges us to hide. But vulnerability, on the other hand, it says, "You are worthy of being seen just as you are."
Hmm.
So it's the difference between shrinking back and stepping boldly into the light.
Wow, that's such a powerful distinction. It's
Totally.
like shame keeps us playing small,
Yeah,
while vulnerability empowers us to embrace our like wholeness.
exactly.
But what I find fascinating is that he doesn't just tell us to be more vulnerable.
Right.
He actually breaks down the characteristics of both shame and vulnerability.
Yeah,
It's almost like giving us this field guide to recognize them in our own lives.
that's right. He gives us practical tools to spot these dynamics at play.
Yeah.
Shame thrives on secrecy, judgment, and perfectionism. It thrives in isolation, and it feeds on our fear of exposure.
Right.
It's like this voice in our heads constantly reminding us to hide our flaws
Oh,
and
God.
strive for an unattainable ideal.
So it's all about hiding, pretending,
Yeah,
and like never letting anyone see the real us.
Yeah.
No wonder it's exhausting.
exactly. And it's that constant pressure to perform,
Mm-hmm.
that can be so damaging. But vulnerability, well, it flourishes in a completely different environment.
Okay.
It's characterized by openness, courage, connection,
Mm-hmm.
and ultimately freedom and growth.
Right.
It's about embracing our imperfections, acknowledging our struggles,
Yeah.
and daring to connect with others from a place of authenticity.
It's almost like vulnerability is the antidote to shame's poison, right?
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And Macor really brings this contrast to life through some compelling stories.
Yeah.
Remember John, the software engineer?
Oh, yeah. He was terrified to admit he'd made a mistake on a project.
Exactly.
Classic fear of judgment.
Exactly. But he finally decided to be vulnerable and own up to his error.
Good for him.
And you know what? Instead of being ridiculed or ostracized,
Yeah.
he was met with understanding and support from his colleagues.
Wow.
They actually rallied around him to fix the problem.
See, that's such a perfect example of how vulnerability can actually lead to positive outcomes.
It really does challenge our preconceived notions, doesn't it?
Right. Totally.
It reminds us that we don't have to be perfect to be worthy of connection and support.
Yeah.
In fact, it's often our imperfections that make us relatable and create opportunities for genuine connection.
So vulnerability isn't just about feeling good.
No.
It can actually lead to tangible benefits in our work and relationships.
Right.
And Macor really drives this point home with the story of Maya,
Oh, yeah.
the graphic designer who was struggling with crippling shame about her work.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we've all been there at some point, right?
Absolutely.
Feeling like our creative work isn't good enough to share with the world.
Absolutely. That fear of judgment can be paralyzing.
Aw.
But Maya finally took a leap of faith and decided to share her designs.
Yeah.
And instead of facing criticism, she was met with encouragement and support.
It's amazing how vulnerability can shift the whole dynamic, isn't it?
It's incredibly powerful. And, it's not just about individual stories.
Okay.
Macor also dives into the deeper psychological layers of vulnerability and shame. He explains that shame often masks deeper emotions, fear, sadness, unmet needs.
So it's like shame is a defense mechanism,
Yeah.
trying to protect us from those more vulnerable feelings.
Yeah,
But in doing so, it can actually keep us stuck in a cycle of fear and isolation.
exactly. That's why Macor emphasizes the importance of uncovering the vulnerability that often lies beneath shame.
Right.
He suggests techniques like journaling therapy and mindfulness
Okay.
to help us explore our emotions and understand the root of our shame.
It sounds like it's all about getting curious about our shame,
Yeah,
exploring where it comes from and what it's trying to protect us from.
that's a great way to frame it.
Ah.
And, he also emphasizes the importance of self-compassion throughout this process.
Mm-hmm.
When we're feeling shame, it's so easy to beat ourselves up.
Right.
But he encourages us to talk to ourselves as we would to a friend,
Oh, that's good.
offering kindness and understanding instead of judgment.
That's so crucial. We can't heal from shame if we're constantly attacking ourselves.
Yeah.
It's like we need to create a safe internal space to explore these vulnerable feelings.
Absolutely. And Macor actually provides a real-life example of someone who was able to reframe their shame about failure into vulnerability.
Really?
They realized that their fear of failure stemmed from a deep-seated belief
Okay.
that their worth was tied to their achievements.
Mhm.
But through therapy and self-reflection, they were able to challenge that belief and find the courage to start over.
That's such an inspiring example of how shifting our perspective on shame can open up new possibilities.
Yeah.
It's not about erasing shame altogether,
Right.
but learning to see it as an opportunity for growth.
Precisely. And that leads us to Macor's concept of regenerating beliefs.
Okay.
It's not just about managing our feelings.
Mm-hmm.
It's about transforming the very narratives that shape our lives.
This is where things get really interesting.
Right.
He's talking about those deep-seated beliefs that shame has planted in our minds.
Right.
Those limiting beliefs that tell us we're not good enough, we don't deserve love, or we'll never succeed.
Exactly. And those beliefs can be incredibly powerful.
Yeah,
They can impact our actions, relationships, and overall well-being.
totally.
But the good news is, as Macor points out, those beliefs are not set in stone.
No.
They're stories we've been telling ourselves.
Mm.
And just as stories can be rewritten, so can our beliefs.
So it's about recognizing those negative scripts,
Yeah.
challenging their validity,
Yes.
and consciously choosing to rewrite them into narratives of self-worth, resilience, and empowerment.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And Macor provides a clear process for doing just that.
Okay.
It starts with awareness.
Uh-huh.
We have to become aware of the negative beliefs that are holding us back.
Right.
Then we can start to challenge those beliefs,
Yeah.
asking ourselves, is this really true?
Yeah.
What evidence do I have to support this belief?
Mm-hmm.
What would happen if I chose to believe something different?
That's so powerful. It's about taking back control of our internal dialogue and choosing to believe in ourselves even when it feels difficult.
Exactly. And Macor emphasizes that this process isn't always easy.
Of course not.
It takes courage to challenge those deeply ingrained beliefs,
Yeah.
especially when they've been reinforced by our experiences or societal messages.
I loved the story of Lisa in the book.
Oh, yeah.
She was carrying so much shame about her financial struggles,
Uh-huh.
believing she was irresponsible and unworthy of success.
Right.
But through therapy and support groups, she was able to challenge those beliefs and start reframing her narrative.
It's a powerful example of how changing our internal dialogue can change our lives.
Right.
Lisa began to replace "I'm irresponsible" with "I'm learning and improving every day."
Wow.
And that shift made all the difference.
I bet.
She started to see herself as capable of managing her finances and began taking small steps toward achieving her goals.
That's like those small steps build momentum, right?
They do.
Each time we choose to challenge a negative belief and
Yeah.
replace it with a more empowering one,
Yeah.
we gain a little more confidence and resilience.
Absolutely. It's like we're building a new foundation for our lives.
I love
A
that.
foundation built on self-compassion, self-belief,
Mhm.
and the courage to embrace our imperfections.
And that's such a powerful image to hold on to as we move forward in this journey of embracing vulnerability.
I couldn't agree more. It's about recognizing that vulnerability isn't a destination.
Right.
It's a practice. It's a commitment to showing up authentically, even when it feels uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And it's in those moments of discomfort, those moments when we choose vulnerability over shame, that we truly unlock our potential for growth and transformation. So, we've been talking about how vulnerability can transform our inner world,
Yeah.
our beliefs, our emotions, our sense of self.
Uh-huh.
But Macor doesn't stop there. He
Okay.
takes it like a step further
Mhm.
and explores how this inner transformation can ripple outwards,
Okay.
impacting our relationships, our communities,
Yeah.
and even the world at large.
Okay, so we're talking big picture stuff now.
Right.
But how does vulnerability actually translate into like tangible change in the world?
Right. Well, he uses this really powerful analogy of a pebble being dropped into a still pond.
Okay.
The ripples spread outwards,
Uh-huh.
impacting everything in their path.
Yeah.
He argues that that's how vulnerability works.
Hmm.
It starts with one person's willingness to be open and authentic.
Okay.
And that act of courage creates a chain reaction.
Yeah.
inspiring others to do the same.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
It really captures the idea that vulnerability isn't just a personal experience.
No.
It has this incredible power to transform the spaces we inhabit
Exactly.
and the people around us.
Yeah.
It's like a force multiplier for positive change.
Exactly. And this ripple effect,
Yeah.
has the potential to address some of the most pressing issues we face as a society.
Like what?
Well, Macor talks about how vulnerability can help to reduce stigma around mental health, for example. When people share their stories of struggle with depression, anxiety,
Right.
or other mental health challenges, it creates a sense of shared humanity, normalizing those experiences.
It's like those personal stories break down the walls of shame
Yeah,
and make it easier for others to seek help.
exactly.
They see that they're not alone in their struggles.
Exactly. He cites examples like Simone Biles and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson,
Oh, yeah.
who have both spoken openly about their mental health challenges,
Right.
inspiring millions to prioritize their well-being and seek support when they need it.
It's a powerful reminder that vulnerability isn't a sign of weakness.
Right.
It's actually a sign of strength and resilience.
Exactly. It takes courage to acknowledge our struggles and reach out for support.
Totally.
And Macor goes on to explore how this same principle of vulnerability can foster empathy and understanding in communities. He highlights community dialogues and restorative justice programs,
Okay.
where personal stories take center stage.
So we're moving beyond individual experiences.
Yeah.
And seeing how vulnerability can impact group dynamics.
That's right. In these settings, people from different backgrounds and perspectives
Yeah.
come together to share their stories and connect on a human level.
Right.
They build bridges of understanding
Okay.
by listening to each other's experiences, challenging stereotypes, and recognizing their shared humanity.
It sounds like vulnerability is a key ingredient in creating more compassionate and cohesive communities.
Precisely. And Macor then takes this idea even further,
Okay.
arguing that vulnerability can inspire movements for social change.
Like how?
He points to the Me Too movement as a prime example.
Okay, now we're talking about vulnerability on a global scale.
Right. Think about it. The courage of individuals sharing their personal experiences
Yeah.
of sexual harassment and assault
Right.
created this wave of awareness
Totally.
and ultimately shifted the conversation around these issues globally.
And it all started with vulnerability.
Yeah.
Those individual acts of courage had a ripple effect, empowering others to come forward, demand change, and hold perpetrators accountable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a powerful example of how vulnerability can create a collective force for positive change.
Okay, so we're seeing how vulnerability can impact communities.
Yeah.
And even spark global movements.
Yeah.
But what about its role in leadership?
Oh, yeah.
Does Macor address that?
He dedicates a whole section to the concept of vulnerable leadership.
Okay.
He argues that leaders who embrace vulnerability
Yeah.
are far more effective at building trust, inspiring loyalty, and fostering innovation within their teams.
So we're not talking about the stereotypical image of the stoic, all-knowing leader
No.
who never shows weakness.
Not at all. In fact, Macor argues that those traditional models of leadership
Yeah.
are often counterproductive. He says leaders who are willing to admit they don't have all the answers,
Okay.
who are open about their challenges, and who aren't afraid to show their human side,
Right.
create a much more authentic and engaging leadership style.
That makes sense.
It's like those leaders are giving their teams permission to be human too.
Right.
It creates a culture where it's okay to make mistakes,
Yeah.
ask for help, and learn from each other.
Exactly. He actually draws on Google's research on psychological safety to support this point.
Oh, wow.
Their research found that teams where members feel safe to speak up,
Yeah.
share their ideas and take risks,
Right.
are more creative, productive, and ultimately more successful.
That's fascinating. So psychological safety, which is essentially built on a foundation of vulnerability,
Right.
is a key factor in team performance.
Yeah,
It allows for greater innovation and collaboration.
precisely. And Macor brings this concept to life by highlighting Jacinda Ardern's leadership
Oh, yeah.
during the COVID-19 pandemic. Her approach was a powerful example of vulnerable leadership in action.
I remember being so impressed by her leadership style.
Yeah.
She was incredibly honest about the challenges,
Right.
transparent about the decision-making process,
Yeah.
and didn't shy away from expressing her own emotions. And that authenticity resonated with people.
Totally.
It built trust, fostered a sense of solidarity,
Yeah.
and ultimately helped New Zealand navigate the crisis effectively.
It sounds like vulnerability is the secret weapon that can transform leadership from a position of authority to a position of genuine connection and collaboration.
That's a great way to put it. It's about leading with both strength and vulnerability.
Totally.
Showing up authentically as a leader doesn't diminish your authority.
Right.
It actually enhances it.
This is all so incredibly insightful, but
Yeah.
I'm wondering, does Macor offer any specific guidance
Yeah.
for those of us who want to be more vulnerable, but struggle with those fears and insecurities that inevitably come up?
Oh, yeah.
Because knowing something intellectually is one thing,
Right.
but actually putting it into practice can feel very different.
He absolutely does. He dedicates a significant portion of the book to addressing those very real struggles.
Okay, good.
Remember all those obstacles to vulnerability we discussed earlier?
Uh-huh.
The fear of judgment, the need for perfection, the fear of rejection.
Yeah.
Well, he provides a practical roadmap for overcoming them.
Okay. I'm all ears. What does he suggest?
Well, first he emphasizes the importance of starting small.
Okay.
We don't have to make these grand gestures of vulnerability right out of the gate.
Okay.
It can be as simple as choosing to be honest about our feelings in a conversation,
Right.
admitting we made a mistake,
Uh-huh.
or asking a friend for help with something we're struggling with.
Okay, so baby steps, I can get behind that. What
But
else?
He also reminds us to seek out safe spaces.
Okay.
This could be a trusted friend, a therapist, a support group.
Yeah.
Any environment where we feel comfortable being ourselves without fear of judgment.
It's about creating a nurturing environment where we can practice vulnerability
Yeah,
without feeling exposed or threatened.
exactly. And he encourages us to reframe failure.
Okay.
Instead of seeing vulnerability as a risk that might lead to rejection or criticism,
Yeah.
he suggests we view it as an opportunity for growth. Each time we stumble or fall short, it's a chance to learn, adapt, and become more resilient.
So it's about shifting our perspective from a fear of failure to a curiosity about what we can learn from those experiences.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, he emphasizes the importance of self-compassion.
Right.
You know, when we're feeling vulnerable and make mistakes,
Yeah.
it's so easy to be hard on ourselves.
Totally.
But he encourages us to offer ourselves the same kindness and understanding
Right.
that we would offer to a friend.
It's about being our own best advocate and cheerleader.
Right.
Especially when things get tough.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And finally, he encourages us to celebrate our wins. No matter how small, each time we choose vulnerability over shame,
Yeah.
each time we take a risk and put ourselves out there,
Right.
it's a victory worth celebrating.
I love that. It's about recognizing our own courage and celebrating those moments when we choose authenticity over fear.
Exactly. And those small victories build momentum. They reinforce the idea that we're capable of growth and change.
Right.
And they help us build confidence for the next challenge.
This is also helpful.
Yeah.
Does Macor provide any specific exercises or practices
It does.
we can use to cultivate vulnerability in our daily lives?
He does.
Because I'm ready to start putting this into action.
He actually provides a checklist at the end of the book
Oh, awesome.
with practical steps we can take to embrace vulnerability and overcome shame.
Ooh, I love a good checklist. Break it down for me.
Well, he divides the checklist into 7 categories.
Okay.
Self-reflection,
Uh-huh.
practicing vulnerability, overcoming shame,
Okay.
building connection,
Uh-huh.
nurturing daily vulnerability practices,
Okay.
strengthening resilience,
Okay.
and inspiring others.
Wow, that's comprehensive.
Yeah.
What are some specific practices he suggests within those categories?
He starts with self-reflection.
Okay.
He encourages us to reflect on our understanding of vulnerability and shame, to identify areas where we tend to avoid vulnerability, and to even write down any shame-based beliefs we hold about ourselves.
Right.
It's all about getting really honest with ourselves about where we're at and what we're struggling with.
It's a great starting point. What about actually practicing vulnerability?
Yeah.
What does that look like in a practical sense?
He suggests starting small,
Okay.
like sharing something honest with a trusted friend or family member,
Right.
even if it feels a little scary.
Yeah.
He also encourages us to admit when we don't know something or need help, and to practice saying, I feel,
Okay.
instead of avoiding or suppressing our emotions, and to express gratitude openly to someone who has helped us.
I love the idea of expressing gratitude.
Yeah.
It feels like a simple yet powerful way to practice vulnerability
Right.
and cultivate connection at the same time.
Exactly. And then in the overcoming shame category,
Okay.
he suggests identifying the triggers that tend to activate shame in our lives.
Right.
Once we know our triggers, we can start challenging the validity of those shame-based beliefs. Yeah. He provides specific techniques for reframing negative self-talk into more compassionate and empowering statements.
It's about actively dismantling those harmful narratives that shame has woven into our minds.
Exactly.
And replacing them with thoughts that support our well-being and growth.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And then when it comes to building connection, he encourages us to practice active listening when others are vulnerable with us. It's about creating a safe space by responding with empathy instead of judgment.
Right.
And strengthening our relationships by initiating honest and open conversations.
It sounds like building connection is all about reciprocity. It's about being willing to both offer and receive vulnerability in our relationships.
You got it. And he suggests some wonderful daily vulnerability practices.
Like what?
He encourages us to start each day with a self-compassion affirmation.
Okay.
Like, I am enough, just to set a positive tone.
Yeah.
And ending each day by reflecting on a moment of courage or vulnerability.
Okay.
He also encourages us to incorporate mindfulness practices. It's like deep breathing or meditation to help us stay present with uncomfortable emotions.
Yeah.
And to acknowledge our small wins, celebrating each step toward vulnerability.
These are all such great practices.
Yeah.
It reminds us that vulnerability is a journey, not a destination.
Right.
It's something we cultivate over time through consistent effort and self-reflection.
Absolutely. And that leads us to the category of strengthening resilience. He encourages us to reframe vulnerability as a strength, to embrace discomfort as a natural part of growth,
right,
and to surround ourselves with supportive people who value authenticity.
It sounds like resilience is all about building our capacity to handle the inevitable challenges and setbacks that come with being vulnerable.
Exactly. And about developing that inner strength that allows us to bounce back from rejection, criticism, or disappointment without losing sight of our worthiness.
Okay, and finally, he has a category called inspiring others.
Yeah.
How does that fit into the checklist?
He encourages us to be role models.
Okay.
By practicing vulnerability in our relationships and work to encourage others to share.
Right.
By creating safe, non-judgmental spaces.
Yeah.
And to use vulnerability to build trust and empathy in our communities.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's like we're not just embracing vulnerability for our own benefit.
Right.
But recognizing that it can have a ripple effect.
Yeah.
Inspiring others to be more courageous and authentic as well.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that vulnerability is contagious.
Right.
And our willingness to be open and real can empower those around us to do the same.
This checklist is such a valuable resource.
It is.
It provides a clear roadmap for anyone who wants to cultivate more vulnerability in their lives.
Right.
And it reminds us that vulnerability isn't just a fluffy concept.
Yeah.
It's a practice, a commitment,
right,
and ultimately a powerful force for personal and collective transformation.
Couldn't agree more. Macor's book is truly an invitation to embrace the power of vulnerability and unlock a more fulfilling, connected, and authentic life.
It's been such a rich and insightful deep dive so far.
Yeah.
I feel like I've gained a whole new perspective on vulnerability.
Really?
But before we move on to the final part of our exploration, I want to take a moment to really emphasize the core message of this book.
Yeah.
Vulnerability is not a weakness. It's our greatest strength.
That's such a powerful takeaway.
It's so easy to get caught up in the societal messages that tell us to hide our flaws.
Right.
Pretend we have it all together and avoid anything that might make us look weak.
Yeah.
But Macor's book challenges those messages.
It does.
It reminds us that true strength lies in our willingness to be authentic,
right,
to show our imperfections, and to connect with others on a heart level.
And that's where the magic happens.
Exactly. When we let go of the need to be perfect, when we choose vulnerability over shame, we open ourselves up to a world of possibilities. Deeper connections, greater resilience, and a profound sense of belonging.
Yeah.
And that sense of belonging extends beyond our personal lives.
Right.
It ripples out into our communities and the world, creating a more compassionate understanding and ultimately a more hopeful future.
That's beautifully said.
So essentially, vulnerability isn't just about personal growth. Right. It's about creating a better world.
Right.
Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll continue exploring this fascinating concept.
Okay, so we've talked about how vulnerability can transform us, like from the inside out.
Right.
And how it can like ripple outwards, you know, impacting our relationships and even society at large.
Yeah.
But let's face it, we live in a world that often seems to be at war with vulnerability.
Mm.
Everywhere we turn, there's this pressure to project an image of perfection, success, and like having it all together.
You're absolutely right. It's like we're bombarded with messages that tell us we need to be more, do more, and have more
Oh, yeah.
to be worthy of love and belonging. Totally.
Mm.
And that pressure is like amplified tenfold by social media.
Oh, yeah.
Where everyone seems to be curating these picture-perfect lives.
Right. It's so easy to get sucked into that comparison game.
Right.
I feel like we're constantly falling short.
Totally. And when everyone else seems to be projecting this flawless image, it makes it even harder to be vulnerable and show our true, messy, imperfect selves.
And that's where the danger lies, isn't it?
Yeah.
When we buy into this culture of perfectionism, we create this breeding ground for shame.
Right.
We start to believe that our worthiness is contingent on our achievements, our appearance, our ability to hide our flaws.
Yeah, it becomes this never-ending pursuit of an unattainable ideal.
Exactly.
It's like we're building these walls around ourselves,
Wow.
trying to protect ourselves from judgment or rejection.
Right.
But in the process, we end up isolating ourselves from genuine connection.
Yeah.
It's like a recipe for loneliness and disconnection, even in a world that's more connected than ever before.
That's such a great point. And I think that's why Macor's work is so important. He's offering us an antidote to this, like, toxic culture of perfectionism. He's reminding us that vulnerability, not perfection, is the pathway to connection, meaning, and fulfillment.
So how do we embrace vulnerability in a world that seems to be telling us to do the opposite?
Right.
How do we resist those messages that equate vulnerability with weakness?
Well, Macor provides a roadmap, a way of navigating this challenging terrain.
Okay.
He starts by encouraging us to become aware of the messages we've internalized.
Okay.
It's about recognizing those beliefs that equate worthiness with perfection.
Yeah.
And challenging those beliefs with intention.
It's like we have to consciously unlearn those deeply ingrained societal messages and start rewriting the script.
Exactly. And practices like self-compassion, mindfulness, and connecting with like-minded individuals become incredibly valuable in this process.
Yeah.
We need to cultivate a supportive internal and external environment to challenge those old narratives.
It's almost like we need to create a counterculture.
Yeah.
A community of people who are committed to showing up as their true selves, flaws, and who support each other in doing so.
I love that image, creating a counterculture where vulnerability is valued and authenticity is celebrated.
Yes.
A space where connection is prioritized over comparison.
And that movement can start with each of us, right?
Absolutely.
It's about making those small conscious choices to be more vulnerable in our daily lives.
Absolutely. It doesn't have to be anything grand or dramatic.
Right.
It can be as simple as choosing to be honest about our feelings in a conversation.
Yeah.
Admitting when we need help. Or sharing a personal story with someone we trust.
Right.
Those seemingly small acts of courage can have a ripple effect.
It's like we're planting seeds of vulnerability, and those seeds have the potential to blossom into something beautiful and transformative.
That's a beautiful metaphor.
Yeah.
And the more we cultivate vulnerability in our own lives, the more we create a world where others feel safe to do the same. We start to challenge those societal norms that equate perfection with worthiness.
Yeah.
We create a space where people feel seen, heard, and accepted for who they truly are.
And wouldn't that be amazing, a world where we can all breathe a little easier?
Right.
Knowing that it's okay to be imperfect, to stumble, to ask for help.
It would be revolutionary.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Christopher Macor's book, what's the one message you hope our listeners take away from our conversation today?
The message I hope resonates most deeply is that vulnerability is not a weakness, but a superpower. It's the key to deeper connections, greater resilience, a more fulfilling life, and a more compassionate world.
Macor's book reminds us that we already possess the courage to be vulnerable.
That's right.
It's within each of us waiting to be unleashed.
That's so true. Sometimes all it takes is taking that first courageous step towards authenticity.
This has been such a rich and inspiring conversation. Thank you for guiding us through this deep dive into the transformative power of vulnerability.
It's been my pleasure.